What would you do if your two K9 dogs suddenly broke formation and ran the wrong way, straight into the woods? At first, everyone thought it was a training failure. But then, from deep within the frozen gorge, came a bark. And what they found next would leave the entire town speechless. A man, barely clinging to life. And a secret buried for years, one that someone was willing to kill for. In this video, you'll follow the true story of two K9 dogs, Shadow and Bolt, who defied orders, and in doing so, uncovered a conspiracy that reached far beyond the forest. They didn't follow the map. They followed their instinct. And it saved a life, and exposed the truth. Studio microphone. You're watching Heroic Animals, where real stories of loyalty, bravery, and instinct come to life like never before. Yellow heart, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell so you never miss the next incredible story. The storm came fast and without mercy. One moment, the mountains were clear. The next, fog, icy rain, winds that howled through the trees like sirens. The kind of weather that erases tracks, muffles screams, and hides everything from view. Somewhere in that whiteout, Henry Callahan disappeared. An experienced hiker, mid-60s, retired military. He'd told his daughter he just wanted to walk the old fire trail one last time before the season ended. He never came home. When the Rangers found his car parked off County Route 7, the door unlocked and his hiking stick still in the trunk, the search began, but by the time the dogs arrived, it had already been 18 hours. And the temperature was still dropping. K9 units, stay with your partners. The ridge splits fast. The incident commander warned over the radio. This terrain plays tricks on you. You separate, you get lost. Officer Donnie Ortega checked her harness straps, then looked down at her partner. Shadow, her 6-year-old Belgian Malinois, looked back up with alert amber eyes. Calm, focused. Let's bring him home. Boy, she whispered. Beside her, Officer Reese was tightening the vest on his own K9. Bolt, a lean, sharp-nosed German shepherd with the attitude of a soldier. The two dogs had worked together before, and their handlers trusted them like brothers. But no one could have predicted what would happen next. By mid-morning, the team had swept nearly 3 square miles of forest. They checked ravines, called Henry's name until their voices cracked, scanned thermal drones. Nothing. The dogs had picked up faint scent trails early on, but they looped in circles, crossing streams and doubling back. The rain had wiped away most signs of direction. By noon, the commander ordered a regroup near the trailhead to reassign quadrants. That's when it happened. As the team began hiking back, Shadow suddenly stopped, ears up, nose high. Bolt did the same, his muscles tense, tail stiff. Then, without warning, both dogs bolted downhill, away from the regroup point. Whoa, Shadow, Donnie shouted, yanking her line. But he was gone, leaping over branches, racing through wet underbrush. Bolt, heel, Reese called out. No use. Both dogs were off leash and out of sight in seconds. Ortega, Reese, report, the radio barked. Dogs are off protocol, Donnie replied, heart pounding. They took off downhill, opposite direction of search zone. Recall immediately, do not pursue. That slope drops into gorge territory. But Donnie was already moving. Shadow doesn't run, not like that, not unless. She didn't finish the sentence. 5 minutes later, they heard it. A bark. Short, urgent, then again, louder, faster. Donnie froze. That's not a random alert, she whispered. That's a fine signal. Reese was already sprinting beside her, navigating the wet rocks. They followed the sounds, deeper into a part of the gorge the team had ruled out earlier. Too far, too steep, too dangerous to be viable. But that's where the dogs had gone. And what they found there, beneath a fallen pine, wedged between 2 jagged rocks, wasn't just a miracle. It was a man, barely breathing. His lips were blue, hands trembling, legs pinned under debris. Henry Callahan, alive, and Shadow, drenched, paw bleeding, was curled up against his chest. While Bolt stood guard, barking until someone came. Donnie dropped to her knees, breath caught in her throat. He broke protocol, Reese said softly, kneeling beside Bolt. No, Donnie whispered, stroking Shadow's soaked fur. He followed instinct. The moment paramedics reached Henry Callahan, the tension thickened like fog. He was still breathing, barely. Pulse faint. Body temp dangerously low. Leg. Pinned beneath a fallen log. Possibly broken. Shadow wouldn't move, even as the EMTs hovered. Even as the team tried to create space. The Belgian Malinois refused to leave the man's side. He lay pressed against Henry's chest, providing warmth, heartbeat steady. Bolt circled once, then sat silently, facing the trees, ears perked. Scanning. Something in the air wasn't right. We need to stabilize his neck and get the weight off that leg. The medic said. Two of you help me lift the log. Donnie and Reese braced their boots and heaved upward. Wood cracked and shifted. Henry groaned, eyes fluttering open. Donnie knelt beside him, gently brushing wet pine needles from his forehead. Henry, can you hear me? You're safe. We've got you. He blinked, then whispered. Not safe? Donnie leaned closer. What did you say? His lips trembled. Someone, still there? Then he lost consciousness. The team went still. What does that mean? The second EMT asked. Could be delirium. Someone muttered. He's hypothermic. Confused. But Bolt suddenly stood up and let out a low growl. Then Shadow, finally moving from Henry's side, stood, ears twitching, and both dogs turned, almost in sync, toward the thickest part of the trees behind them. Wait, Reese muttered. Are they tracking again? The dogs didn't wait. They moved, slow, calculated, into the brush. Muscles tense. Not running this time. Hunting. Stay with the injured, Donnie ordered. We'll go. She and Reese followed the K9s another 50 yards deeper, stepping over moss-covered rocks and between thin-trunked pines. Then they saw it. A crumpled thermal blanket caught in the branches. Nearby, an empty protein bar wrapper. Even further, bootprints. Fresh, leading away. Someone else was here, Donnie whispered. Not just Henry. She took out her radio. This is Unit 4. We have signs of secondary presence. Possibly another individual in the area. Request perimeter extension immediately. Silence. Then static. Then, copy that. Unit 4. Holding medevac until airspace is secure. They weren't just rescuers now. They were in a crime scene. When they got back, Henry had stabilized slightly, enough to open his eyes. He looked straight at Donnie. Tried to hide. He whispered. Didn't want him to follow. Thought I could loop back. Who? Donnie asked gently. Who was following you? Henry's jaw clenched. His hand trembled as he motioned vaguely to his backpack nearby. Reese brought it over, unzipped the main pouch. Inside, a camera. Scratched, cold, battery nearly dead. He turned it on. The screen blinked once, and a grainy photo loaded. It showed a man, mid-30s. Beard, backpack, camo gear, holding what looked like a hunting knife. Not a hiking companion, a pursuer. And from the expression on Henry's face in the selfie, he hadn't expected to be photographed at all. What the hell? Reese muttered. Donnie stared at the image. He wasn't lost, she said slowly. He was being hunted. And that meant, whoever had chased him into these woods might still be out there. Shadow let out one sharp bark. Bolt stiffened, nose high. They weren't just alerting now. They were warning. The moment the image was seen, the search team's mindset shifted from rescue to pursuit. No longer were they just looking for a missing hiker. Now, they were tracking a predator. Someone who had followed Henry into the wilderness and possibly tried to make sure he never came back. And thanks to two K9s who didn't follow orders, they had a head start. Deployed 2 perimeter units northbound. Donnie instructed through the radio. We're tracking a second subject, possibly armed. Dogs have locked on a fresh trail. The command post responded with urgency. But Donnie wasn't waiting. She clipped her line to Shadow's harness. Reese did the same with Bolt. And the dogs moved without hesitation, leading them through twisted roots and dense pine. Every step deeper into the gorge that had almost hidden Henry forever. The trail wasn't easy. Whoever they were following had military instincts, avoided leaving clear tracks. Doubled back at one point, and crossed a shallow stream to disrupt the scent. But Shadow didn't care. He moved like a machine, nose low, tail focused, ignoring the pain from his earlier paw injury. Bolt was just as sharp, occasionally stopping, listening, and scanning the tree line like a sniper. His ears twitched to every broken twig. Then Bolt stopped. Suddenly. So did Shadow. Both dogs crouched, silent, motionless. Something was ahead. Donnie raised her hand, and she and Reese dropped low. Then they saw it. About 50 feet ahead, wedged between two trees, was a makeshift campsite, just tarp and branches, barely visible from above. But more telling was what was inside. A burned fire ring, empty cans of beans, rope, a small hunting rifle, wrapped in cloth and tucked under a camo bag. And next to it, a torn page from a local trail map, marked with an X. Donnie stepped slowly toward the tarp, sweeping the area with her flashlight. Then a noise. Crunch. Behind them. Too heavy to be a deer. Too deliberate to be wind. Reese spun. Someone's watching. Bolt let out a short growl, body shifting into a defensive stance. But then, silence again. Whoever had been here wasn't far. They had either just left, or were still very close. Waiting for a mistake, they radioed in the coordinates. Campsite located. No visual on suspect. Evidence suggests premeditated stalking. Recommend drone scan and thermal sweep. Copy that, came the reply. But the dogs weren't done. Shadow sniffed the ground near the tarp. Then bolted left, following a path deeper. Rougher. More vertical. Bolt followed without hesitation. Do we pursue? Reese asked, already half moving. Donnie didn't answer with words. She followed her dog. The incline was sharp, muddy, slippery with pine needles. And just as they crested a ridge, they saw it. A trail of blood, fresh, still wet, drops leading to a narrow rock ledge. As if someone had slipped. At the edge, a broken branch, a smear on the bark. And below, about 10 feet down in a ditch, movement. Someone was trying to crawl away, hand gripping a mossy root, leg dragging uselessly behind. It was the man from the photo. Beard, camo, wounded, trying to escape. Shadow barked once, and this time, it wasn't a warning. It was a statement. We found you. The man was bleeding, badly. A deep gash along his thigh pulsed with dark red, soaking through the camo fabric. He clutched a branch with white knuckles, dragging himself through mud and pine needles, trying to disappear into the underbrush. But Shadow and Bolt stood between him and escape. Neither barked now. They just waited, alert, focused, calm, like guards who'd already won. Hands where I can see them, Reese shouted, weapon drawn as he slid down the incline. Now, the man didn't resist. He let go of the branch and lay flat, breathing hard, cheek pressed against the cold ground. You're too late, he rasped. I didn't touch him. Donnie approached cautiously, Shadow at her side. Who are you? She asked. And what the hell were you doing out here? The man closed his eyes. Name's Dale Renner, he muttered. I was supposed to scare him. Just scare him, not hurt. Scare who? Reese asked, though they all knew. Callahan. They zip-tied his wrists and radioed for medics. But Dale kept talking. Whether from guilt or blood loss, no one could say. It was a job, he said hoarsely. Follow the old man. Make sure he knew someone was watching. Take pictures. Rattle him. That's all. Who hired you? Donnie pressed. Dale coughed, face twisting. Some guy in a suit. Said Henry had documents, stuff he wasn't supposed to have. Told me to trail him and scare him off the trail. Make it look like he got lost. Said there'd be no trouble. But, Reese growled. But Henry fought back, slipped down a ridge, broke his leg. I panicked. Left him there. Thought he'd die in the cold. I was gonna burn the camp and disappear. He looked up, eyes flicking between the two dogs now standing silently nearby. Then those dogs came, like ghosts. An hour later, Dale Renner was airlifted out under guard. Evidence teams swept the makeshift campsite and found more than just hunting gear. Inside a waterproof folder, surveillance photos, a printed email chain, and a partial map with multiple X.S. Not just Henry's location, but several other names and routes. It wasn't just a random stalking. It was a coordinated operation. And Henry Callahan, it turned out, had once worked as a contract security officer on government land management files involving disputed land acquisitions, environmental reports, and some very expensive legal consequences for people in power. People who didn't want him speaking to reporters. At the hospital, Henry was stable but still silent. Emily, his daughter, stood beside him, tears in her eyes. You knew they'd come, didn't you? She whispered. Henry nodded faintly. I didn't think I'd live to tell it. But then, I heard a bark. Just one. Shadow. And for the first time since he'd been rescued, Henry smiled. Back at the precinct, Captain Reyes stood in silence as Donnie and Reese reported everything: photo evidence, testimony, coordinates. Then he looked down at the two dogs resting by their handlers' feet. "Your K9s broke protocol," he said flatly. "Yes, sir," Donnie replied, lifting her chin. "They also saved 2 lives, exposed a federal-level cover-up, and brought us a suspect no one else could have found." He exhaled. Not bad for 2 dogs who didn't follow the map. That night, the station lights dimmed, but Shadow and Bolt didn't sleep. They sat near the rear window, side by side, ears alert, waiting, because out there, beyond the trees and laws and briefings, there were still people who needed saving. And rules were never more important than the instinct to protect. 3 days had passed. Henry Callahan remained under heavy observation in the trauma unit. Metal rods now stabilized his shattered leg. His body was weak, but his mind sharper than ever. And for good reason. Because the man he'd helped put behind bars, Dale Renner, had lawyers. And more worryingly, connections. "They're stonewalling," Donnie said, slamming the folder down in the precinct conference room. "We sent everything. Photos, maps, that entire flash drive from Henry's backpack." Reese shook his head. "And the feds haven't made a move? They say they're reviewing jurisdiction." Translation. Stalling. Captain Reyes walked in, holding his phone. "Just got word. Henry's daughter, Emily, is requesting police protection. Someone tried to break into their house last night." That landed like a punch. Donnie straightened immediately. "Is Henry safe at the hospital?" "Security's been doubled, but with Renner's background, we'd be stupid to assume he was working alone." Reese clenched his jaw. "They want Henry quiet, even now." That afternoon, Donnie and Reese drove to the hospital with Shadow and Bolt in the back. "Not officially deployed," Captain Reyes had said, "but off the record, I trust those dogs more than I'd trust the overnight security team." When they arrived, they didn't go to the front lobby. They parked near the ambulance entrance and used the staff corridor, where fewer people would see the dogs. Henry was in room 412. Emily met them at the door. "He's asking for you," she said softly. "And the dogs, especially." Donnie smiled faintly. "Of course he is." Henry was pale but alert, propped up slightly in bed. When Shadow entered the room, tail low, ears forward, Henry's entire face softened. "Look at you," he whispered. "Didn't even need a compass." Shadow gently laid his head on the edge of the bed. Bolt positioned himself beside the door, ever the sentinel. Henry motioned Donnie and Reese closer. "You were right," he murmured. "It wasn't just one guy. They'd been watching me for weeks. I had files. Originals, not copies. They knew." "You're safe now," Donnie reassured him. But Henry shook his head slowly. "Not until the evidence is public. Not until it's out of their hands." Then he said something that made Donnie freeze. "It's in the woods." Reese leaned in. "What is?" "The backup drive. I couldn't risk mailing it or giving it to my daughter. I buried it 2 days before the hike. Red tin box, south of the old Firewatch post." Donnie and Reese exchanged a look. Bolt was already on his feet. They didn't waste time. By dusk, the K9s were back in their vests, bounding through dense pine trails lit only by filtered sunlight and tactical flashlights. At the foot of the Firewatch ridge, Shadow sniffed the base of a half-buried tree stump and barked once. Reese began digging with his gloves. Then, clink, a small red tin box, taped shut. Inside, a thumb drive, sealed in plastic, and a note. "If I don't make it home, make this loud." But even as they stood up, they weren't alone. Crack. A twig snapped somewhere behind them. Shadow whipped around, growling. Bolt mirrored him, teeth bared. From the ridge above, a flashlight flicked on. Then another. 2 figures, in black jackets, no badges. Reese whispered, "We're being followed." Donnie clutched the tin box tighter. "Then we don't run. We finish this." She clicked her radio on. "This is Unit 4. We need immediate evac from Firewatch Ridge. We have the drive, and we're not alone." Shadow barked once, then stepped forward. The forest at night is a different world. No birds, no wind, just breath, heartbeats, and the faint, ominous crunch of boots on wet leaves. Donnie crouched low behind a fallen tree trunk, one hand gripping her radio, the other holding the red tin box tight against her chest. Reese was 10 feet away, pressed behind a boulder, whispering into his mic. Shadow and Bolt were motionless, frozen statues in the dark. Both dogs had their ears pointed toward the ridge above, where two figures in black had appeared. No insignia, no lights, and now, no sound. The flashlight beams had disappeared. "They're flanking," Donnie muttered. "We're being hunted, just like Henry." The radio crackled. "Unit 4, helicopter is inbound. ETA 6 minutes. Hold your position and mark it with strobe." Reese activated the beacon on his vest, a blinking red pulse against the trees. But 6 minutes could be a lifetime. Suddenly, Bolt lunged forward with a fierce bark. A shot rang out. Crack. Donnie threw herself flat. Bark shattered from a tree inches from her head. Shadow darted toward the shooter. His growl deep and raw. "Shadow, no," Donnie shouted. But it was too late. The dogs had seen enough. They weren't just defending now. They were attacking. The firefight was short, fast, and chaotic. One of the figures tried to flee down the slope, but Bolt chased him hard. Leaping through bramble and tackling him flat. Donnie heard the man scream as the German Shepherd locked onto his arm, pinning him with surgical precision. The second figure wasn't so lucky. He tried to rush Danny's position. But Shadow was already there, exploding from the dark with a speed that defied instinct. He collided with the attacker mid-charge, sending both to the ground. Then, another shot. Not aimed. Accidental. Shadow yelped. Everything stopped. "Shadow!" Donnie screamed, vaulting over the log. The attacker was already down, groaning under the force of the dog's hit. His weapon kicked several feet away. But Shadow, he was limp. Blood pooled near his hind leg. Dark and steady. Reese ran over. Bolt still guarding the pinned suspect. "Pressure. We need pressure now." Donnie pressed her vest against the wound. Tears forming. "Stay with me, buddy. You're okay. You did everything right." Shadow didn't cry. He just looked at her. Eyes steady. Tail barely moving once, then again. That was enough. Minutes later, the chopper arrived. The suspects were cuffed and loaded. Bolt refused to leave Shadow's side in the helicopter, whimpering softly until the medic told Donnie, "We've got him. He's tough. We're not losing him." Back at the hospital, Shadow went straight into surgery. The bullet had torn through muscle, just missing the femoral artery. The vet tech looked at Donnie and said, "You brought him in just in time." 2 days passed. Donnie sat in the recovery wing, one hand resting on a bandaged paw. Shadow was asleep, but breathing steadily. Beside her, Reese sat with Bolt, who hadn't stopped staring at the door since they returned. "They were professionals," Reese said, "not just hired thugs." "I know," Donnie replied quietly. "This goes deeper than a hiker and a flash drive." She looked down at Shadow's peaceful face. "And I think our boys just made them nervous." Across town, Emily Callahan stood in front of a row of cameras. She held up the red tin box in one hand. And with calm, steady voice, she said, "My father didn't get lost. He got silenced. This drive contains what they didn't want you to see. And now, the country will." Behind her, the press erupted with questions. But none louder than the story already told, by two dogs who followed their instincts. Even when no one else believed them, the drive went public. The news broke nationwide within 12 hours. Henry Callahan's data exposed a tangled web of illegal land deals, falsified environmental reports, and kickbacks involving 2 state senators, 1 federal contractor, and a security firm that had once trained Dale Renner. Headlines screamed, "Whistleblower nearly killed in state forest. Heroic K9s lead officers to conspiracy trail." But for Donnie and Reese, it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because when the truth comes out, someone always pays the price. Shadow was healing, slowly. He lay in a private room in the K9 trauma wing. Stitched and sedated but stable. Every time Donnie visited, he'd wag his tail, even if only once. That was enough. Bolt, on the other hand, had become unusually restless. He would sit for hours at the back door of the precinct, staring outside, occasionally growling low when no one else seemed to notice a thing. Reese tried to distract him, training, food, attention. Nothing worked. Then one night, Bolt began to bark. Short, sharp bursts, focused on something across the street. Reese followed his gaze. There, parked at the edge of the lot, sat a black SUV with no plates. It pulled away the moment Reese stepped outside. They're watching us now, Donnie said the next morning, her tone grim. Reese nodded. We rattled the wrong cage. But it was more than that. That day, a field office connected to the old security firm was firebombed. And one of the state senators named in Henry's files? He was found dead in his vacation cabin. Official cause: carbon monoxide poisoning. Unofficial whisper: silenced. Then something worse. A letter, unsigned, typed, was found taped to the precinct's rear door. You should have let the old man freeze. The dogs too. Stay out, or we come in. The message was clear. They weren't just reacting. They were hunting back. Donnie stared at the note. Her jaw clenched. Then she looked at Bolt. He was sitting at the back entrance. Calm but alert. Eyes fixed on the treeline. And something in her gut twisted. That night, Donnie stayed at the precinct with Bolt while Reese rotated out. Shadow remained under care, but stable. Around 2 a.m., Bolt perked up, then growled, and bolted for the side exit. Donnie followed, heart racing, flashlight in one hand, sidearm in the other. Outside, the cold was sharp. Fog clung to the ground like a ghost. Bolt circled a dumpster once, then growled louder. And there, half buried under a tarp, was a motion sensor camera. Still warm, still blinking. Someone had been watching the K9 unit entrance. And recently. Reese arrived minutes later. He didn't have to ask what it meant. They're tracking the dogs, he said flatly. Not just us. Donnie nodded. Bolt sensed it. Same as before. She looked at him. We need to move them. Both of them. Now. By sunrise. Both K9s were moved to an off-grid location used only in emergencies, an old ranger station outside county lines. Shadow was groggy but resting. Bolt wouldn't sleep at all. He kept watch by the window. Ears up, tail still, as if he knew this wasn't over. The ranger station was quiet. Too quiet. Donnie stood at the window with her coffee untouched. Bolt sat beside her, motionless, eyes locked on the treeline. Shadow, still bandaged, rested in the next room. He was healing, but fragile. The vet had said any sudden stress or movement could reopen the wound. That's why Donnie didn't want to believe what her instincts were telling her. That the real storm hadn't passed. It was just waiting. Back at the precinct, Reese reviewed surveillance footage from the hidden camera Bolt had discovered. Frame by frame, it showed a man, hooded. Slim, no identifiable marks. Checking the kennel gate. He never went in, just stood there, watching, waiting, then walked away. Not toward the street, but into the woods behind the station. He hadn't been there for intimidation. He'd been scouting. At 1:43 a.m., the radio on Danny's hip crackled with static. Then a voice. Unit 4, we've lost signal from the station perimeter feed. Danny's eyes widened. She reached for her flashlight. But Bolt was already up. Growling. Then, bang, a side window shattered. Flashbang. Light. Noise. Chaos. Donnie dove over Shadow's bed just as the back door splintered open. 3 figures in tactical black burst through, silent, masked, armed. They weren't here to threaten. They were here to clean up what they didn't count on. 2 dogs, wounded or not, who'd already smelled blood. Shadow, despite the pain, let out a deep, guttural bark that shook the walls. Bolt launched first, crashing into the lead intruder with a force that flipped him backward. Donnie rolled and fired once, missed. But Bolt didn't. He locked his jaw on the attacker's wrist, forcing him to drop his weapon. The second man swung a baton, cracked Danny's shoulder, but she kicked him back. Raising her sidearm again, Shadow limped forward, dragging his injured leg, but still stood between Donnie and the final assailant. He barked once, then again, and then, he lunged. Wounded or not, he knocked the man off balance. Just long enough for Donnie to take the shot. By the time backup arrived, the scene was over. 1 man dead, 2 captured. Shadow, weak but alive. Bolt, panting and bloodied, stood like a statue over Danny's body, protective, unrelenting. And in her hand? The red tin box. Still there, still sealed, still safe. In the days that followed, arrests were made across 3 states. The evidence had triggered a domino effect: resignations, indictments, investigations. Whistleblowers came forward. The press wouldn't let the story go. But the photos that captivated the world weren't from the courtroom. They were from the ranger station. Shadow, lying beside a wounded intruder. his paw resting protectively on the tin box. Bolt, staring into the fog, teeth bared, daring anyone to come closer. 2 dogs, 1 mission, no regrets. Weeks later, Donnie and Reese stood in full dress uniform. The mayor presented medals, but the audience barely listened. Their eyes were on the 2 K9s sitting at center stage. Shadow, now walking without assistance. Bolt, tail high, tongue out. Neither barked. They didn't need to. The nation already knew. These weren't just dogs. They were the reason a man lived, and a truth survived. Months have passed. The investigations triggered by that red tin box led to trials, resignations, and reforms that rippled far beyond the state line. Henry Callahan, now recovered, lives quietly with his daughter, his voice no longer silenced, but heard. And Shadow? He walks again. His scar is visible, but so is the strength in his stride. He returned to light duty, not because he had to, but because he couldn't imagine staying behind. Bolt remains his shadow, faithful, steady, vigilant as ever. They train together, sleep near each other, and every time they hear the soft crackle of a radio, their ears perk up, because somewhere out there, someone still needs saving. In the end, they weren't just K9s. They were protectors, instincts that defied orders, loyalty that never wavered, and courage that changed everything. They didn't just find a dying man. They found the truth, and made sure the world couldn't look away. Thank you so much for watching and staying with us until the end of this incredible story. The courage of Shadow and Bolt reminds us that sometimes, the heroes who change lives, walk on 4 legs. If this story moved you, please consider subscribing to our channel so you don't miss the next tale of loyalty and bravery from the animal world. And we'd love to hear from you. Memo, what did you feel? Paw, what moment hit you the hardest? Leave your thoughts in the comments, your voice matters here. Speech Balloon. We'll see you in the next story. Until then, stay kind, stay curious, and never underestimate a K9.